We are live on Facebook. Just flagging that Atia was set to embed, so we'll embed when she returns.
I can do that, Tim. It's
Great.
Jen.
Great, thanks, Jen. Appreciate that. I am going to enable the waiting room in 1 second. I'd like to give one last check through the participant list to see our remaining speakers. For those watching on the live stream, we're just about to begin. Please stand by.
On presenter is video off.
All right, I'm going to release the meeting, a waiting room. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'll hand this over to one of our co-hosts, Logan.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this digital rally. Thousands of us are coming together today to send a message to leadership at all levels of government that we need a just recovery from COVID-19. So we have people joining us from all across the country. Welcome. We're going to give you another minute or so to get connected, and then we will get started. But as we wait for our people to join, we're going to start with a poll to find out what region of the country you're joining us from today. So shortly, you should see the poll pop up on your screen, and it's multiple choice, and you can tell us where you are joining us from today.
And while the poll is going, we are going to play some awesome music by one of my favorite local artists, Tanya Ganaba. The song is called Got to Know.
When patience is a virtue, so baby, don't be moved. Once upon a time, I would have played that game. That's all we got and a name. I wanna know your name. Ooh, yeah. Ooh, 4 strings out, old school bell, heart on sleeve, show and tell. I got questions, you got lessons. You said you know what I mean. You know what I mean, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, 4 strings out, old school bell, heart on sleeve, show and tell. I got questions, you got lessons. You said you know what I mean, yeah.
Hey, everybody. Wow, looking at this poll, we have some big representation from the central region, also West Coast. So shout out. I'm hailing from the West Coast. I think my co-MC Logan is as well. So welcome, everybody. It's a really great and diverse group from across the nation.
Great. Okay, well, let's get started. Hi, my name is Logan McIntosh. I am the co-executive director at Lead Now, and I'm calling in from the unceded Coast Salish territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
Hi, and my name is Anjali Padarai. I'm a climate justice campaigner with Sierra Club BC, and I'm also calling in from unceded Coast Salish territories, more specifically Coquitlam Nation. And we recognize that people are joining from all over, so wherever you are, I invite you to take a moment to acknowledge whose territory that we have the privilege and responsibility of living and working on. And if you're not sure whose territory you live on, you can actually go to native-land.ca leadland.ca. And you can enter where you live, and it gives you a whole bunch of information about whose land you live on and any treaties that might exist there. So take a moment to have that acknowledgement and hold it, and or look up where you are.
Great. So on this next slide, you'll see an image of a young girl and an adult caring for one another with the title Just Recovery and the logos of the organizations that helped to organize today's online rally. Those organizations are Lead Now, Sierra Club BC, 350.org, and CanRAC. And we are all part of a larger movement of more than 400 groups across Canada, including Indigenous leaders, labor unions, and environmental and social organizations that have been calling for our governments to invest in a just recovery coming out of the COVID pandemic. The shape of the next decade is going to be set by decisions made over the next few months. We can't go back to normal. Normal sacrificed people for profit. Normal put us on track for climate catastrophe. We don't have to go back to normal. And that's exactly why we're here today.
Right now, it feels like times are really, really at a critical point. We're in a moment of intersecting crises. We're still in a global pandemic. We're seeming like we're at a boiling point of anti-Black racism. We're also still in the middle of a climate and ecological crisis. But we're also in a time of unprecedented political participation and also what seems like a major turning point in making some real changes around police brutality and systemic racism. So these are urgent times, but these are also incredibly hopeful times. Right now, we have a once in a generation opportunity to flip the switch away from business as usual, away from exploitative wealth accumulation at the expense of working people and at the expense of vulnerable people, and towards something so much better. A more fair, sustainable, and just Canada that works for everyone and not just the wealthy few. So today, we're here to tell our political leaders that to get out of the crisis and to build back better from it, we need a just recovery, one that allows us to come out on the other side better equipped to take care of one another and of the planet.
So now I'm going to tell you a bit more about Zoom and its features. If you feel comfortable, it's a good time to turn on your camera. That'll help us see everyone at the rally. And I've heard that there are more than 1,000 of us tuning in right now. So many that we've already capped out Zoom, which is pretty amazing. So to turn on your camera, there is a button on the bottom left corner of your screen. And it would be on your computer or your phone. On the top right, there's also a button that says speaker view. So you can click that to see the person who is speaking. And if you're on your phone and you want to see all the faces that are in this beautiful rally, you can swipe the screen to see those faces. Today's rally is going to be in English, but our friends at Équiterre, FTQ, Oxfam, Greenpeace, and some other organizations held a rally yesterday in French, attended by 700 people and MPs across party lines. And you can check out that recording in French with the link that's going to be posted in the chat shortly. Unfortunately, we were unable to secure ASL support for today's event. So for those of you who require closed captioning, a captioned recording of this event will be made and posted on justrecoveryforall.ca /erally, and it will be posted tomorrow. And the link for that will also be posted in the chat in a minute. One final note is that we have muted everyone's microphones automatically because we have so many people on the call today. We won't be hearing you, but there's lots of other ways for you to engage in the rally today.
Yes, and we have the amazing opportunity to have a Q&A with our speakers and guest MPs at the end of the rally. And that's a great opportunity, and we want your input. So you can submit a question, and to do so, you just send your question to questions@leadnow.ca. And we won't be able to answer all of them, but if we see some themes emerging from your questions, we'll be able to convey those to our speakers and MPs. So please do submit a question and feel free to do that. Also, if you are having tech challenges at any point in this call, we've got Cherry on the line to help you. Thank you, Cherry. You can give her a call at 1-855-532-3609, extension 76. And that number will be in the chat as well, because it's quite long. So thank you, Cherry, and she'll be available for the duration of the call. And finally, but not least, please do feel free to post on social media. We have to build this conversation together. So if you're posting on social media, please use the hashtag #JustRecoveryForAll, and that way the organizers can repost and we can build a buzz around a just recovery, which is what we need. So hashtag #JustRecoveryForAll.
Okay, let's jump in. So what we're going to hear first is we're going to hear from some incredible speakers who will introduce and then contextualize the Just Recovery principles. So we're going to hear from Jennifer Kuhl from Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. Then we'll hear from Ariel Deranger from Indigenous Climate Action, followed by Syed Hassan from Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. Then, after we've heard from those speakers, we're going to present over 100,000 petition signatures calling for a just recovery to MPs from across party lines. We're also going to get to listen to a video recording from Minister of Climate Change and the Environment, Jonathan Wilkinson. We'll hear from Nathaniel Erskine-Smith from the Liberal Party, Monique Posé from the Bloc Québécois, Jagmeet Singh, leader of the NDP, Laurel Collins, NDP MP, and Elizabeth May, former leader of the Green Party. We're also going to get a chance to ask these MPs questions about how they will govern to implement a just recovery. And reminder that you can send us any questions you'd like to ask them at questions@leadnow.ca.
All right, so before we jump in and hear from our incredible speakers, let's just take a moment to situate ourselves. Wealth inequality, racial injustice, runaway climate change, the greatest injustices of our time, they existed long before COVID-19. But the pandemic just brought these deep inequalities even more to light. We've slowly started moving from the response phase into the recovery phase, with the Prime Minister confirming that an economic plan will be announced in just 2 weeks on July 8th. So this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to rebuild a society that works for all, not just the wealthy elite. However, far-right political insiders and lobbyists are currently calling for cuts that would sacrifice the most vulnerable, call for environmental deregulation that would deepen the climate crisis, and are also calling for massive corporate bailouts that would put profit over people. Basically the opposite of what we're calling for with the just recovery principles. We can't let that happen. And so we have to be louder, more organized, more cohesive, and more visible than the lobbyists who want to hijack this opportunity to rebuild better. And so we have some incredible speakers who are going to help us imagine what that better nation could look like. So first up, we have our first amazing speaker, Jennifer Kuhl, who's the policy and campaign lead of climate change and toxics at the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. I'm proud to call Jen a friend, and she's a really incredible speaker. So please give her a very warm welcome with your good vibes. So welcome, Jen.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation, and to all the organizers for bringing this incredible group together, and to all of you online for taking time out of your day to join us and for doing work to build a just recovery in your own communities. I'm currently living on the traditional Indigenous territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit in what is now being called Toronto. And this land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. And I learned from Ariel, who's the next up to speak, that treaty was an agreement. It was something that two sides were supposed to uphold, and sides of an agreement. And it is incredibly clear from the ongoing violence against Indigenous people and against the land that people who came and settled here through past and ongoing colonialism are not even not upholding that part of the bargain. We are running against it. And I think part of a just recovery is figuring out how do we live in a way that means that we are less destructive. And I want to start by really saying that colonialism and racism are what landed us in this position of climate crisis in the first place. If we didn't devalue the lives of people on the front lines of climate change and of fossil fuel extraction, we wouldn't have the climate crisis to begin with. So to echo something that Kat had said on a previous webinar, the fight against racism, that we're really seeing a forceful move against anti-Black racism at the moment, but the fight against racism and the fight to stop climate change are the same fight. So as Ange said, the challenges that we're facing didn't arrive with COVID. the pandemic simply laid them bare. For example, people caring for our elders should never have had to work 2 or 3 jobs to feed their families. No one should be one paycheck away from losing their home. And healthcare workers and communities should always have what they need to be safe and healthy. So COVID really showed us the precarity that so many people are living in. But it also showed us that when we want to, we can make massive change extremely quickly to protect health and save lives. And when we had this choice between like fearing each other in the face of a virus, so many people chose community. They reached out across time and space. Networks for care sprung up all over the country. And this pause reminded us that the way that we've been living is untenable and unhealthy and unsafe for so many. And so we have this choice about what we're going to do going forward. How can we use this moment as a fulcrum to pivot towards a healthy, safe, and just future for all? The Just Recovery process really started when people in many organizations across sectors were having these conversations and asking these questions. And a few organizations, many who are running this call, came together and asked, like, what if all those people had this conversation in the same digital space? And so we pulled together a really large conversation with 120 organizations. And what came out of that, one of the things that came out of that was this desire to create guiding principles that were based on a set of international principles from 350. And so we started with those principles, and a group of between 20 and 40 people worked for weeks to incorporate feedback from dozens of other people to draft 6 principles that provide a broad framework that will hopefully allow us to push in the same direction across sectors as we come out of this pandemic. So at their face, the principles are simple. Put people's health and well-being first, no exceptions. And this means, in addition to making healthcare accessible and appropriate for everybody, that we're doing all we can to stop the climate crisis, and we're tackling systemic racism and white supremacy that contribute to and cause health disparities. Strengthen the social safety net and provide relief directly to the people, including status for all. Build resilience to prevent future crisis. It means we're investing in communities so that they can thrive, and only building infrastructure that doesn't entrench the industries that are going to cause the next crisis. Build solidarity and equity across communities, generations, and borders. This means supporting Black Lives Matter. And uphold Indigenous rights and work in partnership with Indigenous people. So those are the broad principles that these 400 groups have signed on to. And there's so much thought went into the other text that goes along with those principles. So I encourage you to read them. And many groups are taking those principles and running with them. For example, at CAPE, building on health and well-being for all and building resilience, we've been looking at the health impacts of health benefits of decarbonizing our economy. We found thousands of lives could be saved from air quality improvements alone if we moved away from fossil fuels, in addition to the lives that would be saved if we avoid the worst impacts of climate change. You can look for more details on July 19th. And I know that many orgs, including many of the orgs on this call, are working on very specific policy asks. So we're truly at a turning point. I believe that we collectively, all of us on this call and beyond, will bring about this change, and it would be easier with courageous leadership from our governments. So we're asking our elected officials, will you commit to a just recovery? Or will you sentence our children, my sweet niece and nephew who are almost 2 and 4? Will you sentence them to a lifetime of recurring crisis? So this crisis, this reality, is their whole lives. Will you leave our children a planet on fire? And will you sentence Black and Indigenous children to state-sanctioned and systemic racist violence, politely permitting lives and families to be destroyed because we can't move too quickly and we can't upset the status quo? But here's the thing, the status quo is already upset, and the status quo was not working. And now we have this incredible opportunity to choose a different future, to build back better. And I believe that it will come the way COVID relief did, by thousands of us working together with care and compassion and open hearts and ferocity. We're standing at the threshold between the old world and the next. Let's build a better one. Thank you.
Yay, Jen, thank you so much. That was incredibly inspiring. You're such an incredible speaker. And I love how you framed it with the real foundations of this whole crisis, which is the fight against racism and colonialism is the fight against climate change. And we need to build from that foundation. So thank you for that very, very powerful laying the groundwork for our work. Really appreciate it.
So
we're going, sorry,
no,
is somebody saying?
you go.
All right, actually, it's over to you, Logan, my bad.
No worries. So next up, we are going to introduce Ariel Deranger, who is the founder and the executive director of Indigenous Climate Action and a member of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Ariel. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here. Masicho, hi. Eklanete, Dene Sotlaneta, Ariel Tsaekwe Hushe, Deranger, Betsi Ni Hasli. My name is Ariel Tsaekwe Deranger. As Logan stated, I'm a member of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, which is a member of the Treaty 8 territory. And so we are signatories to Treaty 8 from 1899. And so just as a context that I like to share with folks is that 1899 may feel like a long time ago, but my grandfather, not my great-great, but my actual grandfather was born in 1898. So he was alive at the time of signing of treaty. An infant may it be, but it's still something in the very recent history of our people. I currently reside in Amiskwichi-Waskahigan, which is also known as Edmonton in the Treaty 6 territory. And I want to acknowledge the territories where I am also a visitor, where I live in Treaty 6. And I want to thank the organizers for bringing this, this e-rally together, because it's really, really important when we talk about just recovery and the principles for just recovery, that we don't just look at what it means to call on our national governments to take action, because there is a responsibility and an imperative of civil society, and particularly those that have access to privilege and power, that have not historically been marginalized, excluded, and disenfranchised from these systems, to stand up and ask for better. We need the international community to go beyond just acknowledgements of Indigenous territories. And what does it mean to actually reconcile the past wrongdoings, the breaking of historical treaties time and time again that have left our communities in crisis for centuries? The current crisis, which is a global climate crisis, compounded with a global pandemic, and now, most recently, with a heightened awareness of the systemic and racist institutional systems that have got us to this place. We have a crisis upon a crisis upon a crisis. The lived reality for Indigenous folks in so-called Canada is that we have been living within these crises since colonization. We have lived through pandemics that were purposely put into our communities to eliminate us from the landscapes and the lived histories of our people. We have to recognize that Indigenous peoples are nations. We have our own governance systems. We have our own laws, and those laws are fundamentally driven by the natural world. Sometimes people don't understand why we have different rights as Indigenous folks. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was only passed in 2007. So that is a very recent history, and it upholds and it's built on the tenets of something called free, prior, and informed consent. And that actually looks at what it means to be sovereign and independent and have self-determination for our communities. And that can only happen when we are seen as equals. And Indigenous peoples, the values and why we have that unique tenets of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is because we have collective rights. So the UN Declaration of Human Rights looks at our individual rights. which we absolutely need to uphold and have. But the collective rights of Indigenous peoples isn't just about our community as a human species, but our community and our relationship with the natural world, and how we are driven by our ancestry and our relationships with the animals that swim in the water, the ones that fly, the four-legged ones, the insects, the plants, the medicines, the waters, the land, the mountains, the sun, the moon, and the sky. These are all of our relations. And when we talk about just recovery, we're not just talking about investing money into what that looks like from the government. It's about a paradigm shift of how we relate to each other. How do we uphold tenets of free, prior, and informed consent when we haven't even held up the tenets of the treaties and the foundations of this country? How do we move forward in equalizing the relationships of nation states within a nation? We have to absolutely challenge these systems and look at how we can uphold and actually implement systems of sovereignty and autonomy in our nations that allow us to move forward to create solutions that are driven by our Indigenous value systems. We need to build solutions that nurture food security, water security, housing security, energy security, and that can only come from one strategy. That is looking at our relationships to the land and our autonomy and our ability to govern those lands and territories ourselves. There is a growing movement of Indigenous youth across so-called Canada and the United States and across Turtle Island called Land Back. We cannot think about a just recovery without having autonomy and self-control over our lands and territories. We need solutions that enable thriving communities for everyone. 80% of the world's biodiversity is housed within Indigenous lands and territory the world over. This is not an accident. This has happened because we have value systems where our lives are intricately connected to those places. I am Dene Sotlene, or Dene, and the word means of the land. We are absolutely connected. The name of my nation in our language is Kaitale Dene Sotlene, which means people of the willow, and gives reference to the Athabasca Delta and where I come from. These are not interchangeable relationships. We have to think about how current governments currently are looking at holding all that power. But we have to, as society, talk about a redistribution of not just the government budgets, but a redistribution of the power that is held and the wealth outside of these structures. We must recognize that this means investing, uplifting, and empowering those that have been disenfranchised for centuries. And we have to find a fundamental shift to move how we recognize the Indigenous rights and the constitutionally upheld Indigenous rights in this country to move beyond just acknowledging and saying our names. This means that we have to fundamentally look at restoring systems that have been robbed from our communities for generations. And our fights for recognition and civil liberties is very similar to what we're seeing within the rise of the Black Lives Matter resistance movement and the revolution that we are seeing across Turtle Island. We are talking about communities that have been disenfranchised and excluded from these systems for centuries. We need a fundamental paradigm shift that upholds all of those that have been oppressed racially and structurally for generations. And that means conceding power and looking at how we can uphold our communities, moving from an individual perspective to that collective perspective. How do we move away from looking at ourselves, not just as humans that we're trying to protect into the next generation, but an entire ecosystem of humans, animals, plants, sky, and everything. It is our creator that allows us to bring forward and bring those stories from our generations. And we stand in solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters, with the migrants that don't have rights to participate in civil democratic society. And we want to see rights and status for all. Thank you, Masicho.
Wow. Oh my gosh, Ariel, everybody send a big beam to Ariel of gratitude for your words. Thank you, Ariel. I've been hearing you speak for many years now, and I consistently learn something new every time. And I always come back in my mind to that statistic that you shared about 80% of the world's biodiversity being under the stewardship of Indigenous peoples. And that says so much And you articulated it as well, how Indigenous knowledge and value systems are fundamentally a different logic than extractivist capitalism. So thank you so much for that. We are moving to our third speaker. Syed Hussain is the Executive Director of the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change and helps coordinate the Migrant Rights Network. I'm looking forward to this additional perspective as well. So thank you so much, Hussain, for being here. Please, everybody, give a warm welcome with your vibes to Hussain.
Thank you for having me. I live on territories that have been defended, cared for, taken care of by the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, and the Haudenosaunee. The pandemic is a portal, Arundhati Roy tells us, between this world and the next. So before speaking of what has come before and what must come after, I want us to pause in this moment before we talk about just recovery and talk about this portal called COVID-19. Imagine for a moment the breadth of your grief, your longing, your want to touch a loved one, to see a friend, to be with those that you love and that love you back in these last few months, but that you couldn't. Can you imagine then for a moment what decades of separation by borders feels like? What migrant mothers, domestic workers, women separated from their children feel? What refugees feel separated from their homelands? Imagine the feeling of panic or boredom, of uncertainty and of tiredness when you are unable to leave home. Can you imagine then for a moment what incarceration could be like? Can you remember each time you think about the lockdown that over half the people in prison in this country are still awaiting trials, who are technically innocent? Or that Indigenous women make up 42% of imprisoned women while only making a few percent of the population? Imagine the clarity that this moment has provided you with who sustains you, who sustains us, the farm worker, the health worker, the delivery worker, the cleaners, the grocery store workers. Can you hold on to this clarity as we step through this portal? That what sustains life is not those that choose profit, but those that ensure care. And can you remember that it is those that sustain us? Those were the ones that were forced to keep working, put their lives and livelihoods at risk. Can you remember once we're through this portal, that we lived once, you and I, through a period where almost all inessential travel was stopped, where people chose to stay home or often consumed less, and yet climate change marched on. That individual action is not enough to stop the climate catastrophe. Can you remember in this moment, it was not corporations or privatization that protected us. Remember that when they tell you otherwise, but social services and mutual aid. And then in this portal that we are in, can you see and can you remember what it is that the pursuit of profit did to our elders in long-term care homes? Or that the homeless were going to be left to die till they rose up? Or that farm workers are dying and suffering in the fields, greenhouses, and factories? People like Bonifacio, Rogelio, Juan, through migrant workers who have died from COVID-19, who knew that their working and living conditions would kill them, but they could not speak up because they would have faced deportation because they didn't have status. And in this portal, this COVID-19, remember that the strongest determinant of COVID-19 outbreak was the level of income in your neighborhood and not your personal health. And as we are in this portal, can you remember one day that when they will ask you to forget that no one should be evicted if it will make them homeless, that everyone deserves healthcare, that laws can change overnight. Can you remember that in this portal, a 44-year-old Korean man was stabbed as violence grew against East Asians, that migrants were treated as carriers and as the risk, as borders were closed, even as migrants here were attacked and fell ill? And in this portal that we are in, can you remember that Coastal GasLink pipeline kept working, that Ontario changed labor laws so that you could be fired without pay, that Canada began to sell weapons of war and death to Saudi Arabia on the same day as the first COVID-19 case emerged in Yemen, that Alberta passed a law to attack civil liberties? Can you remember who it was who sold us out when we were in peril? And in this portal that we are in, can you remember that in this moment, in this portal, just since April, police in Canada have killed 9 Indigenous people. Isha Hudson, Jason Collins, Stuart Kevin Andrews, Everett Patrick, Abraham Natany, and Iqaluit Men from Apex, Regis Kuczynski-Paquette, Chantal Moore, and Rodney Levi. Can you see in this portal, in this moment, that what broke us free from this potential terror of death? In a pandemic, in the hundreds of thousands, what brought us to the streets is the far greater scourge and menace of anti-Black racism. For when we leave this portal, when we step into the next world, the world in which all of us can thrive, we must come through chanting Black Lives Matter. And as we step through this portal into this new world, let it not be a return to normal. For the normal for many of us was the slow death before this now, the fast death. Normal is deportation, 10,000 a year. Normal is in endless imprisonment without charges or trial simply for being born elsewhere. Normal is 1 in 23 people in Canada are temporary migrants or undocumented, denied most services. Normal is weapon sales. Here in this country, one of the top 15 arms exporters of the world. Normal is debt to the poorest countries in the world, to banks in places like Canada, which went up 85% in the last decade, even as they paid it back. Normal is Israel's annexation of Palestine. Normal is gold mining. Normal is attack on the working class. Normal is half of all women in Canada have experienced at least one incident of physical or sexual violence since the age of 16. Normal is a woman is killed in Canada every other day in gender-based violence. Normal is over 1,000 missing and murdered Indigenous women. Normal is 8 queer and gay men disappeared and murdered by a serial killer before police in Toronto cared. Normal is borders. Normal is isolation, displacement, refugees. Normal is death. Normal is that we live in one of the last few places in the world where the colonizer remains is in control of government. Normal is broken treaties. Normal is colonized land. So when we say refuse the return to normal, in this day, at this hour, as we gather for a just recovery, as we gather to step into this new world, let it be where all our lives blossom. Let it not be climate justice and environmental rights for this place now called Canada, while the rest of us, the poor, the robbed, the ones colonized in the global South suffer. Let it not be a place, let it not be a world where in this place called Canada, there is recovery for citizens, but not migrants and undocumented people. Let us build a just recovery where every life, wherever it is sacred, valued, loved. Let us build a just recovery with status for all, one single tier immigration system that everyone has full and permanent immigration status. Just recovery is food for all, health for all, homes for all, not just here, but everywhere around the world, not just humans or life. Just recovery is when they come and tell us to tighten their belts, which they will. They will come and tell us that their bailed us out now so that we must have austerity next. In that just recovery, you, we and I, we refuse. Let us ensure that when they scare us about rising deficits and tell us that we are poor because of the immigrant, when they make us fight each other at the bottom of the barrel for the few resources, we refuse. Let us enter a just recovery which begins with Indigenous self-determination. Let us enter a just recovery with land back. Let us be united. Let us hold hands. Let us leave no one behind. Let us leave this portal ready to fight for the fight of our lives is coming. And that is what it will be. But we have a world to win, and now is the time. The portal is open. Step forward.
Wow. Hassan, I wish you could hear the sound of the people who are watching you speak. That was incredibly powerful. Thank you for that. And thank you for making the just recovery mean something to all of us. And we cannot go back to normal. And the picture that you painted was so clear. So thank you. Whew. Okay, so where we go next from here. Before we shift gears, one thing to mention, you can see in the chat now a link that will take you to the Migrant Rights website for an action around the call for status for all. Take a moment now to open that up. We'll be sharing it again later, but make sure that you do open that up and take action and become a part of the fight for status for all. Moving on to our next section, we really do have a narrow window of opportunity to shape the government's plans coming out of the other side of this pandemic. And I think it was just last week that Trudeau was saying that they are getting ready to move from the emergency response phase to the recovery. We know that already there are important meetings that are underway shaping this next phase. And so this is really why we're here today, because right now we need to demonstrate the power of our numbers and call on our MPs to push back against big oil lobbyists and the corporate interests that are trying to put profits ahead of people. So before we move to hearing from our MPs that have joined us today, we want to do another quick poll. So you'll see a poll that's going to pop up right now on your screen. And we'd like to hear from you around what you think the most important thing government should consider as they look to fund our recovery program from COVID. So take a moment now and fill that in. We're seeing responses slowly come in. Great. We've got over 300 responses already, so they're flying in.
Keep them coming, folks. We're also hearing some incredible feedback from these speakers, and rightly so.
Another thing we're hearing is a couple people mentioning they're noticing that their signs look like they are reversed. But actually, if you are holding a sign up, it's only a mirror image for you. So for all of us, we can read it clearly, and it just looks a little backwards for you.
And also just a reminder, we will be sharing these slides and this webinar will be recorded. So you can go back, like I will be going back and listening to the words from our speakers thus far, once again. All right. We've got some pretty great responses. More than 80% of you have voted. And if you haven't yet, I encourage you to do so. Let's see, are we going to share these poll results? I think so, right? It's actually pretty evenly spread. Great participation, thank you so much. And I know it reflects that a lot of you are concerned about the climate crisis, and rightly so. Of course, all of these things are interconnected and all of these things are crucial. And we expect the government to deliver on all of them while respecting and upholding Indigenous rights, and while involving frontline communities in finding solutions. So luckily, we have some political leaders, members of parliament on this call today, who are going to receive our petition signatures and let us know how they are going to take our concerns back to parliament. Very much looking forward to hearing from them.
But as we mentioned earlier, we are up against some powerful opponents. Some of you would have seen this in the news. I think it was maybe a month or so ago, where CAP, the oil lobbyist group, have been pushing their set of demands, trying to pressure the federal government to hit pause on climate action. We're also seeing far-right political leaders like Stephen Harper come back and start pushing for harsh cuts, reckless environmental deregulation, and massive corporate bailouts in response to the pandemic. But everyday people like you and me, the thousands of us that are here today at this Just Recovery rally, we are overwhelmingly in support of using this moment to build back better by investing in millions of new jobs, transitioning to a green economy, and putting our health first. That's why since the pandemic hit, we've seen an outpouring of support for this idea of a just recovery.
And since we launched, our friends from Environmental Defense, David Suzuki Foundation, Greenpeace, Stand.Earth, 350.org, Sierra Club BC, and Lead Now have had petitions circulating, and over 100,000 people have signed for the government to invest in a just recovery from COVID-19. And this says a lot. So today we have MPs from across party lines, from the Liberal Party, the Bloc Québécois, the NDP, and the Greens, who are here to receive our signatures and to take our message to Ottawa. So you'll see their faces in a minute. Please join me in giving a very, very warm welcome to the MPs who have joined us and taken their time to listen to our demands and are ready to receive our petition. Normally, we would deliver these petitions in person with all of you in the crowd and with the petitions piled in boxes handed over to decision makers. And on the next slide, there's 4 photos from past petition deliveries where we did exactly this. But because of the current circumstances, of course, we're doing this online and we're sending these signatures digitally right now by email to the members of Parliament.
So now we're going to hear directly from 4 MPs around how they're going to take the Just Recovery Principles to Ottawa. So they're each going to have around 2 minutes to open, and then we'll have time for questions from all of you. So a reminder, you can send questions and you can also tailor them for specific MPs, and you can send them to questions@leadnow.ca. Unfortunately, Minister Wilkinson wasn't able to join us today, but he did send us a video recording. So we are going to watch that now. We're just pulling it up. There you go.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Wilkinson, Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change. I want to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking to you from the traditional ancestral territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. I hope you are all doing well despite the incredibly challenging times our country and indeed people around the world are going through. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this virtual e-rally for climate action in support of a just recovery for all workers. This past fall, which now seems like a lifetime ago, Canada went through an election where climate action was top of mind for most voters. Over 2/3 of Canadians voted for parties that support strong climate action, and our government was re-elected with a clear mandate to be more ambitious. And despite the health crisis that we are in today, tackling the climate crisis remains a top priority for Canadians. Since 2015, our government has enacted the first national climate plan that Canada has ever had. It includes over 50 different measures, from a price on pollution, phasing out coal, investments in renewables, public transit and zero-emission vehicles, banning harmful single-use plastics, doubling our protected lands and waters, and more. As we implement the next phase of our climate plan and we recover from COVID-19, we need to listen carefully to and be sensitive to the legitimate concerns we hear from all regions of our great country. We know that people need to be at the heart of our climate policy, and that brings me to the essential question of just transition. Amongst our climate commitments during the election, we also committed to a Just Transition Act. We want to ensure that energy workers and communities can shape their own futures. We thus committed to developing and introducing a Just Transition Act. By introducing this act, we will ensure workers have access to the training, support, and new opportunities needed to succeed in the clean economy. Canada needs to grab hold of the opportunities presented by clean growth. At home, jobs in the clean energy sector is growing nearly 4 times faster than the Canadian average. This presents a huge opportunity for many rural, northern, and Indigenous communities and for Canadians across this country. Taking climate action is about protecting and enhancing our future, both environmentally and economically. People must continue to be at the heart of our policies, from the coastal communities threatened by rising seas, Indigenous peoples working to protect their lands, to the resource workers who are not certain as to how they'll put food on the table. We all need to be working together to develop and define a clean and just pathway forward. We are working very hard. We can certainly use your help, your thoughts, and your ideas. Merci. Thank you.
All right, so next up, we are going to hear from Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP. Jagmeet, can you tell us about how you're planning to take action for a just recovery in Ottawa? We'll pass it over to you now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been really inspirational to hear all the really powerful words that have been shared. I know that there's a frustration out there. We're seeing it when it comes to the demands and the cries for justice when we're speaking of systemic racism. And similarly, when it comes to action on the climate crisis, people are fed up with just the pretty words and the empty gestures. They need real action. So what we've put together is we also support this idea of not going back to normal. We want to go forward to something better. So we put together a team working on how do we build a better Canada where we take better care of one another. And that means building a clean economy where we are sustainable, resilient, fair, where we make the wealthiest pay their fair share, where we invest in each other, our healthcare, social services. So with that, I actually want to pass it off to my environmental critic, who is a dear friend and also an amazing, passionate voice. So Laura Collins, I want to cede some of my time to her, and she'll take it away. But I'm committed to not just the pretty words and the empty gestures. We want concrete action. I want real change, and that's what we're fighting for.
Thanks so much, Jagmeet. And I want to echo all of that. You know, we need to be investing in retrofits, in transit, in renewables. And just thank you so much to the three speakers. Your words were so powerful. I am joining from the Lekwungen homelands, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, and the way in which this conversation has been centered around upholding Indigenous rights, around making sure that we are upholding migrant justice, so important. And a shout out to our colleague Leah Gazan, who's put forward a bill protecting the right to a healthy environment that centers upholding the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I just want to say that it's important that we focus on all of this, but it's also important we acknowledge where we're at right now. Canada has missed every single climate target that it set, every single one of them. And so we need policies and legislation that will put us back on track. We need climate accountability. We need to put our targets into law and also our milestones into law as well. We need to end fossil fuel subsidies. This is about choices. We need to stop the Trans Mountain Expansion Project, $12 billion that could be invested into the solutions that we know are available. I think that it boils down to choices. We need a wealth tax if we are going to have a just and sustainable recovery. We'll close up there. I just want to say thank you so much for having us here. It's an honor to be here.
Thanks, Laurel, and thank you for those remarks, Jagmeet. Now what we're going to do is we are going to pass it over to Elizabeth May from the Green Party. Elizabeth, will you tell us about how you are going to take these just recovery principles and bring them forward in Parliament? Over to you.
Thanks, Logan. And I really want to start, well, of course, I want to start by acknowledging the territory that I'm on. In the Coast Salish territories, I'm on the lands of the Wasanuk people. And I will say to you in Senchothan, Haishka Siam, I raise my hands to all of you in respect and gratitude. And I want to especially raise my hands to Jen and Hassan and Ariel for the introductory speeches, which I really think are so important. And when Ariel talks about all my relations, this is something I've learned from my dear friend and colleague Adam Olson, who's leader of the British Columbia Green Party, who is Tsartlip First Nation, and talks about how, you know, when you translate the word in Senchothan for whales, or let's just start with people, it's the human people. Whales are translated literally as the whale people, the salmon people, the tree people. So we're deeply in relationship, and I don't think we get out of the climate crisis or deeply embedded racism or deeply embedded patriarchy without acknowledging that our entire system, our society and our economy are laden with patriarchy, colonialism. It's an exploitative model of never-ending economic growth, which undermines and underpins all of these issues that we were talking about, that farm workers are treated so shabbily coming here from Mexico to grow our food that they die. This is just, again, the normal we had is not the normal we want. We can't go back to what was there. So I've taken this already to Ottawa. When I was in Parliament last week, and I was the only member of Parliament who seemed to remember, it was the 1-year anniversary of us passing a motion that we were in a climate emergency. And I said to Jonathan Wilkinson, do you know the difference between an global atmospheric concentrations of 417 parts per million with a well-meaning environment minister, or one who is disinterested or actually hostile to climate goals? No difference at all. So what we heard from the minister says nothing that's meaningful about the post-pandemic economic strategy, nor the climate emergency, nor the urgency that we slash emissions and more than double our current target and do it within 2020. So I'll keep pushing. This pandemic's been really interesting. I know my time is up, so I won't keep going. Hoping questions we talk about what we've been able to do behind the scenes to stop a bailout that focused on multinationals, to focus on help to fossil fuel workers, because a just transition is essential. I also want to thank, I know they weren't speakers here today, but Black Lives Matter is become such an incredible vehicle for change. And I want to thank everyone associated with Black Lives Matter for their work.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Always love hearing from you. And a very good shout out to Black Lives Matter at the end. I think it's so important to keep tying that in. Unfortunately, Monique Posse from the Bloc Québécois could not join us today. She was going to speak next. She sends her apologies, but she had also participated in the French e-rally yesterday, which you can check out online. I believe the link will be in the chat. And thank you to Jagmeet and Elizabeth May and Laurel for your comments. We are counting on you. We really need you to bring these principles in a strong way back to Ottawa. So everybody here on this call is counting on you, and we'll be waiting and hopefully following up. So now we're going to open it up to the audience to ask some questions, and we have some questions already ready to ask, and we also encourage you to send your questions to questions@leadnow.ca. So first off, I have a question for Nathaniel Erskine-Smith. And my first question for you, Nathaniel, is Nathaniel on the call? Yes.
I'm here, yes.
Okay, awesome. Hi. So, Nathaniel, you've had a seat at the table of the COVID-19 Pandemic Committee, and you've seen firsthand the gaps in our social security net. And so the question is, how would you ensure that we close these gaps to strengthen our social security net so that no one is left behind and so that we're more resilient to future crises?
So I'd say a few things. First, I appreciate the opening remarks from Jennifer, Hassan, and Ariel. And to the point of a just recovery initially, I think we have to maintain a focus on a credible path to net zero and ensuring a just transition for affected workers and regions. And on the climate side, that means greater ambition in our targets. And we've seen a commitment to net zero by 2050. We've seen a commitment to 5-year carbon budgeting and a commitment to put an accountability framework into legislation on the ambition side. We've seen, and on the accountability side, and then we've seen significant action. We've moved the needle by reducing projected 2030 emissions by 25% since 2015. We have to do obviously more. We haven't done enough. We have to build on that. As part of the just transition and ensuring that we're closing out gaps in our social safety net, I think it comes down to looking at basic income support. So we've expanded the Canada Child Benefit, we've expanded GIS for seniors, we've expanded the Canada Workers Benefit. We know that these benefits alongside EI were not fit for the purposes of this pandemic. And the CERB actually has been a significant move forward in ensuring that there is a basic income support for many. We've extended it now. I think we ought to extend it beyond the 8 weeks, and I think we'll have to going forward. We ought to improve it and redesign it as a negative income tax, just like the Canada Child Benefit and GIS for seniors are molded on. And then we have to expand eligibility so that nobody falls through the cracks. And we have to ensure that there is that basic income support for all Canadians in need if they fall below a certain income level.
Great. Thanks, Nathaniel. We're going to move now to our next question, which is for Laurel Collins. So, Laurel, the COVID pandemic seriously highlighted the need for not-for-profit healthcare, especially in the long-term care sector. We've seen these devastating stories coming forward and glimpses into what is happening to our elders in long-term care facilities. What do you think in terms of how we can address this crisis of healthcare to ensure dignity and respect for our elders? What can be done and what should be done differently?
Thanks so much for that question. It's such an important one right now. I think Canadians have been seeing their loved ones, the elders in our community, in horrific conditions. And we need to take profit out of long-term care. We need national standards across Canada to make sure that this kind of situation never happens again. And it's such a stark example of how this was happening before the pandemic, and the pandemic has exposed what is happening underneath the surface. And I think we can apply that same lens to so many different areas, whether it is migrant justice and what's happening with temporary foreign workers, the policies that we have in place for long-term care and in so many other areas of our society are not working for people. And it's why we need dramatic changes, and we'll be in there pushing to take the profit out of long-term care, to have national standards across Canada, and to make sure that we are prioritizing the health and well-being of our elders, of our elderly loved ones, but also of the workers in those facilities, making sure that we have standards of care and standards of workplace safety.
Thanks, Laurel. That was really much needed. Thank you. We have a question for Elizabeth May next. So Elizabeth, runaway climate change, an issue dear to your heart, has resulted in serious environmental catastrophes pre-COVID and during. So how can the federal government prioritize a green economic recovery that creates jobs in the clean energy sector while helping us transition away from fossil fuels? And
Anjali, I need to ask you to repeat, because I think you said something that I need to drill down on, because I think we've got to be careful with our language. Did you, before you said climate change, did you say runaway?
Yes.
Well, that's very important that we not, sorry to correct your question
no
before
problem.
I start to answer.
Tell us your thoughts
but
on
we
that.
can't, well, we cannot allow ourselves to be in a situation of runaway global warming, because that's extinction. That's like saying, now that we've lost, how do you suggest we keep fighting? So I'm sorry for being so hardcore on these things, but language matters. And what we're fighting to avoid is those tipping points in the atmosphere that mean we can no longer stop it. So runaway global warming, hothouse Earth, all of those phrases mean that we've lost before we, because what we have to avoid is getting to levels of, and this is why we have to follow the IPCC advice of October 8th, 2018. We must hold global average temperature to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, because if we go above, we're playing Russian roulette in falling into runaway global warming. And runaway global warming literally means that the self-accelerating positive feedback loops that turn us into a planet that no longer can sustain, certainly can't sustain human civilization, but probably can't sustain human life. So looking at why did all the delegates from Africa and all the low-lying island states march out of the Copenhagen conference in 2009 chanting 1.5 to stay alive. These are certainties of science that cannot be transgressed. So that's where I thought, wait, did you say that? I'm so sorry. But so what was the rest of your question? I probably used up all my time.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. And language is important. And for me, it's hard because it's so important also not to minimize that climate change has had irreversible effects and worse in the developing world. And so it's hard because we also don't want to steal hope from our youth as well. I've been hearing that the language is difficult for young people when we talk about it in apocalyptic terms like that. So it's a balance. It's like recognizing this is ongoing and devastating and irreversible for so many populations in the world, while also not robbing ourselves of hope. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I really, really appreciate that. So the question was, how federal government prioritize a green economic recovery that creates jobs in the clean energy sector while helping us transition away from fossil fuels? And the second part to that, if you don't mind, is can you tell us a bit more about what has been happening behind the scenes to stop the big oil bailout?
Thank you. Look, I'm really sorry for it. And by the way, this is a big conversation we need to have. And I know it's great to have. I want to thank Climate Action Network and 350.org and Lead Now and Sierra Club BC for organizing this online rally. But it's a big conversation to have. I mean, Greta Thunberg is uncompromising, and you might think the language is scary when she says our house is on fire. But so if I say, I don't want to say that that's despairing language for people to be afraid, I'm going to go back and say it's empowering language to know we've still got time. We've got to grab it with both hands. So yes, in terms of pandemic, post-pandemic economic recovery, if we're evidence-based, we look at the work, for instance, of a large study done by Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winner, and Sir Nicholas Stern that said, if you want to get out of pandemic, if you want your economies to recover, the most effective strategies are those that are not about fossil fuels. Fossil fuels days are done. We have to invest in the economy of the future, which is renewable energy. We have to improve our electricity grid in Canada, big time. We have to retrofit our buildings, residential, commercial, institutional, so that our built infrastructure becomes carbon negative, that we're producing more energy in our buildings than we're using. And behind the scenes, and Nate can talk about this, in the pandemic, there's been a real flattening of hierarchy. So if an opposition MP chooses to do so, you can have a lot of conversations with ministers and push and push and push. And I've found an openness. And I don't, listen, believe me, if we were not in a minority parliament, it would be very different. If we only had Trudeau keep his promise that 2015 was the last election under first past the post, we'd be in way better shape. But there are allies like Nate, who is only, sorry, Nate, I think only in name are you a Liberal. But anyway, that's good. You're a good guy. You keep fighting in there, man. And what we have to do, I know, sorry for Nate, but I mean, I think the Liberal caucus made a huge shift, and Nate has a lot to do with this, as does Mark Garrettson in Kingston. A bunch of Liberals said no to tech frontier. And I know, Ariel, that's when we were last campaigning, was no to tech, reject tech. There was a sea change in how people like Bill Morneau understand the climate emergency when they realized their own caucus isn't going to go along with an expansion of an oil sands mine. This is interesting stuff. We need to, I think if we could get partisanship right out of politics, like if there were no political parties, we'd be doing way better, but we're more or less stuck with them. And what you may think of out there in the world that parties that you think are your friends, well, yeah, if there's a partisan advantage in moving away from climate, they'll do it. That's why the NDP ran on attack the tax way back when. So we have to think about getting away from partisanship and working with allies. And behind the scenes, we were able to funnel, as Greens, a lot of good, solid information about the potential for cleaning up abandoned oil wells. Orphaned wells can be converted to geothermal electricity. It isn't hard for us to see any money going to fossil fuels because we're so dead set against fossil fuel subsidies. But we did not want a penny post-pandemic going where CAP wanted it, into expanding fossil fuels.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks for that, and also for really exposing and bringing us into the conversation around what would happen if we were to move beyond partisan politics. And I think that's a message that we have all the time in the world for, and is really critical for us to be talking about as we move to thinking about what this next phase of building beyond the COVID pandemic is going to look like. Where we're going to go next is we're going to hear a question from Hassan. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Hassan, to ask an MP a question now, and you should be unmuted.
Thank you. 1 in 23 people in the country, 1 in 23 are migrant and undocumented. 500,000 people have no papers and were denied CERB because they did not have social insurance number. Many more because their social insurance numbers were invalid and could not be reviewed due to COVID-19. Only one province in the country actually gave full healthcare, that's Ontario, even during a public health pandemic. Migrant and undocumented people had to pay for testing and treatment. Tens of thousands of domestic workers can't leave their employer's home, haven't left for 3 months. International students are in a crisis and will probably not get immigration status. And migrant farm workers are working and dying while the border remains closed to refugees. So to the federal politicians, but particularly to the Liberal members here, why is it that you're choosing to sacrifice 1 in 23 people in the country? Why will you not ensure that everyone in the country has full immigration status so they can take care of themselves? Without permanent residency, You cannot protect yourself. Each and every one of us every day chooses to put on a mask, decides where we go and where we don't go. Migrants don't have that choice because doing so means deportation, loss of income, homelessness, and the inability to come back in the future. People's lives are being sacrificed, and the federal government is choosing to take the side of the employers, of the exploiters. We're calling on the Liberal government to ensure full immigration status for all. My question is, what is stopping you?
I mean, I wish I had a great answer for you. I'll have a bit of an answer for you, and I can walk you through some of my advocacy. I'm not a cabinet minister, so I can't fully explain the prime minister's position and the position of cabinet. But in the last parliament, as an example, we saw a push from committee. I certainly added my voice to the push to have greater open work permits. We know there's a great imbalance in bargaining as between employers and migrant workers, and that imbalance causes all sorts of different problems, and we need to address that imbalance. I don't think we made incremental progress. I would say not enough. When you talk about status for all, I've heard from community members here, the East End Community Health Center here, who daily support people on the ground who don't have status with health issues. And we need to provide a pathway for residency for people who have been here for an extended period of time or who have come here to work here and to benefit our society. And we provide these pathways for residents for other kinds of workers. We see it. We've created a dedicated pathway for residents for people who come as nannies, for example, and as to work into people's homes and to look after kids. And there's no reason we can't take that model and make it work for other individuals who are coming from countries to support, whether it's in our agricultural sector or beyond. In terms of the hesitation for doing so, I mean, I think we can talk about the climate crisis, we can talk about the addressing racism writ large, but I think one challenge and this is all politicians, we like to cast ourselves as leaders, but fundamentally, politicians respond to constituents and respond to Canadians. And so on this issue, I think it's not only demanding accountability and action from federal leaders, I think it's also an education exercise. And I know your organization has been a strong public voice on this, to the point that the Prime Minister has said at his daily press briefings that he's going to look at this in a more serious way. But I do think, and to your point about the pandemic being a portal, it has definitely sped up Canadian society's demand for action on a number of fronts, including this one. But if I'm to explain why climate progress has been slow, if I'm to explain why action on addressing migrant issues has been so slow, if I'm to explain why, I could go down the list, racial inequities, animal protections, I go down the list of injustices, but it's because Canadians are not demanding it, and so politicians are not responding to that demand.
Thank you. I just want to add to this. When you're saying, look, we don't have, domestic workers have a pathway to permanent residency. It's not a pathway, it's a minefield. The vast majority of people don't qualify. They come here, they spend 24, 48, 72 months working in people's homes, taking care of other people's children while being separated from their own. And at the end, they have to jump through hoops that they can't get through. Look at the numbers, at the vast rates of rejection. When you talk about open work permits, there's almost none for poor people, none for working class people. They exist for the rich primarily, and even then there are severe limitations to it. So absolutely, I think we need to convince the vast majority of society about the injustices that the government has created on our communities. But there has to be a role and a moment to stop and think and listen and realize that the solutions that are being proposed are not just inefficient or ineffective, but they're actually only serving the interest of the rich and the few.
Logan, can I jump in for a moment?
I think actually we have to keep moving because we've got a question from Ariel that we want to make time for. And so I think we're going to go directly over to Ariel because unfortunately we are running short of time. So Ariel, we're going to pass it to you and you should be unmuted.
Yeah, so I just want to thank Hassan for that question, because the reality is that within the context of the current framework of so-called Canada, there are many people that remain disenfranchised and on the margins of being able to access social services. And you would think that that wouldn't also extend to Indigenous peoples as the original peoples of this country, but the reality is we still have to jump through numerous hoops to access the same services as white society or non-Indigenous society. And we often have this disproportionate burden being able to even overcome some of the simplest challenges of accessing water, health services, education, and so on and so forth. And this should not be the case for anyone. It should not be the case for migrants and refugees, and it should definitely not be the case for Indigenous folks in this country, but it is. And when we talk about a just recovery, we have to reconcile that this has been the lived reality for people for generations, and we absolutely must fundamentally change things. From an Indigenous perspective, I think one of the biggest challenges is that I have a question for the MPs here, is like, we talk about truth and reconciliation when it comes to Indigenous rights in this country as if we are somehow reconciling the wrongdoings by naming them. But what does actual reconciliation look like in the context of a just recovery? How do we reconcile the fact that there is a lack of sovereign Indigenous leaders in the development of high-level decision-making that has huge implications on closing the gap of being able to access the services that we have been disenfranchised from for generations? This is namely in the way of like how we look at energy and resource development. We are still talking about pipelines being built. We are still talking about extractive industries expanding in my territory in Treaty 8. And we have bills being passed to try to further block us from being able to object and protest those things. Our civil liberties are being diminished rather than being increased. And how do we actually move towards true reconciliation in the context of a just recovery?
Thank you, Ariel. That was really hard hitting. And I just want to give one of the MPs a chance to respond to that, because the goal of the conversation is for them to hear from us and to let us know how they're going to take these demands back to Parliament. Laurel, if you're still there, I'd like to call on you if you'd like to respond to what Ariel said and to the conversation thus far.
Thanks so much, Ariel. And yeah, I think this is in some ways the foundation and the crux of all of the work that we're doing. I was on a town hall last night, Building for Better, our task force, and we had Bob Chamberlain, who was just talking about how this paradigm shift was needed before the pandemic, but it's so essential right now that we need to absolutely completely overhaul how we've been operating and make sure that Indigenous communities, Indigenous voices, and Indigenous leaders are leading the way, that we are actually following the lead of Indigenous peoples. And when it comes to a sustainable and just recovery, why are we not talking about the investments in fixing drinking waters on reserve? How is it even possible that in 2020 we have not addressed this problem? And if we're going to have stimulus funds and green infrastructure and investment, shouldn't it be prioritizing the huge inequalities that we have in our society? And I think that piece around fossil fuel development and its impact on Indigenous communities, that really the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that document should be the core framework moving forward on any project. We need to rapidly transition away from fossil fuels and leave those industries behind and transition the workers, but we need to make sure that Indigenous communities are actually not only at the table, but leading the way and making the decisions for themselves, and especially the people who are directly impacted.
And that's a wrap. Yeah.
Can I just respond? I hope that includes giving Indigenous peoples the rights to manage their own territories. Like, these are our territorial regions. It's not just about, bringing us to the table. It's about empowering us to have autonomy and self-determination over our lands and territories, which are ours and have been ours for millennia.
Hear, hear. Yes.
That's a very clear demand, and that is the bottom line. So thank you so much, Ariel, for closing that off. I wish we had more time to dig into this, but I think the organizers who have been speaking have made very thoughts on this very clear, and I think that really underscores the idea of the just recovery principles. So thank you so much to all the MPs. We enjoyed getting a chance to hear how you'll represent these principles in Parliament, and we look forward to following up and seeing the journey of that. All right, so this is really amazing. We're coming close to the end, but we have still so much important work to do before the end of this call. We have over 1,000 people here and 5 MPs, but we need more. We need even more members of Parliament, journalists, and political leaders to hear the message. And normally, when we gather on the streets, people can clearly see the power of our movement visually, but here online, we'll have to be creative. So before we go today, we're going to take an innovative group photo. We're going to scroll through each of the screens on Zoom with your cameras on, if you're comfortable, and take screenshots of all the faces. And don't worry, it won't be a close-up. It will be a tiny image in a sea of thousands of people. So if you haven't already, now's the time to turn your camera on. So you should have received an email before today asking you to print out a sign. And if you don't have it, no worries. But if you do, just hold it up for the photo. And we're going to play some awesome music for you while we take the photos. So if you have the signs, hold them up and then keep them up for a minute. So we're going to start taking the screenshots up. The song is by Desiree Dawson, one of my local favorites, and it's called Just Fine.
Hey there, resistance, knocking at the door. I'm gonna head out back, go on and explore. You are persistent. I recall this from the past. There's intention in my heart, so you can't hold me back. There is a part of me that knows that I'll be just fine. There is a part of me that knows it's all in my mind. Just fine, just fine. There is a part of me that knows that I'll be just fine. There is a part of me that knows it's all in my mind. There is a part of me that knows that I'll be just fine, just fine. I have an issue, I'm still trying to find the answers.
Oh my gosh, you guys, these signs are really awesome. That was absolutely beautiful and inspiring for me to be able to see all your faces and the signs. So thank you. We got some amazing screenshots, and we're going to share the photos with you after, and we're going to put them all over social media. So thank you for contributing to this beautiful mosaic of faces that's representative of our movement. Over to you, Logan.
Yeah, that was so beautiful. And Anjali, great work in picking a very perfect song for those photos to be happening. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit about what comes next. There are thousands of us here today, and our work is far from over. So we've been hearing about how the next couple of months are going to be critical in setting the direction of Canada's recovery program, and there's a lot more that we can all do. So we're going to hear from three excellent organizers who are going to pop on and tell us about how you can take action. And you'll see that there is a link in the chat that you can click on. And when you click on that link, there will be a sign up page for all of the actions that are going to be referenced or pitched in the next couple of minutes. So please do click on that link and you'll see all of the different ways that you can check off the actions that you can be a part of. So first up, we're going to hear from Atia from 350.org, and I will pass it over to you.
Hi, Logan. Thanks so much. So grateful to be here. I'm calling in from unceded Coast Salish territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and really grateful to have had the opportunity to hear from all the amazing speakers, especially Ariel and Hassan and Jen. So today I'm here to talk about a really exciting campaign that organizers across the country are working on. It's a campaign to essentially start decentralized conversations about a just recovery, because we know that the first step to winning is making sure that as many people as possible are talking about a just recovery and the principles for a just recovery and what it means for our individual communities. So across the country, over 40 communities have hosted digital teach-ins about what a just recovery means, going over the principles, having these conversations. And we really want to encourage as many people as possible to keep these teach-ins going throughout the summer. It's a great tactic that you can do from home if you're not comfortable going outside in these COVID times. And I know that there are still physical distancing restrictions in a lot of the country. It's also a tactic that can kind of start a conversation about what a just recovery means for all of us and build just the foundation for the movement that we will need to win a just recovery. The good news is that the 350.org team will set you up with all the resources that you need. So we'll give speaking notes and do a toolkit that you can kind of see all of the that are available for video conferencing. So yeah, we're happy with the resources if you're interested. We'll help you every step of the way with the resources that we have available. And if you want, there are some teach-ins that are still coming up in different communities. So if you're not able to host a teach-in, maybe you could just check out our map and join a teach-in close to you. And I'll pass it to Rachel.
Awesome, thanks Atia. Those teach-ins sound super powerful. Hi folks, my name is Rachel Tetro and I'm an organizer with Lead Now. I just want to tell you about what Lead Now is working on right now and how you can get involved. So right now, Lead Now is organizing meetings with MPs across the country to introduce the just recovery principles to them and get the principles on the political agenda. Because if we're going to stop corporate interests from hijacking this opportunity to rebuild better and stronger after the pandemic, we need to be louder and more organized and more visible than we've ever been. Luckily, there's thousands of you on the call today, so hopefully we get lots of folks signing up to have these meetings. Because we know that constituents meeting directly with their MP is a great way to get our politicians' attention. They care what local voters, the people who elect them, think. And we want our MPs to know that their constituents want them to prioritize people and the planet, not polluters and corporations in the COVID recovery. So normally we would do these MP meetings in person. Many of you may have participated in these meetings with us before, but because of the pandemic, we're doing a new way of meeting with MPs and we are setting up Zoom meetings, very similar to the call you are on today, but likely with very less people than 1,000 people. It'll just be with a few folks from your riding. And so our plan is to have hundreds of us meet with our MPs in ridings all across the country. And we're going to be asking them to support the just recovery principles. We're also going to ask them to support bold climate action as part of the recovery effort, as well as a commitment to work across party lines to ensure a just recovery is implemented. And one meeting with an MP might not feel very impactful, but when hundreds of us do this coordinated across the country, and we have constituents sharing the same message over and over again, it's really sure to grab their attention and really have an impact. So we'll support you every step of the way. We've got toolkits, we've got folks on a support line who you can call up and make sure that you feel really prepared to go into your meeting with your MP with another group of folks from your riding. All you need to do is sign up. So that link that is on your screen right now, bit.ly/JRAction is where you go to sign up for both what Atia was talking about, what I'm talking about, and what Anjali is going to talk about next, as well as some of the different efforts that our speakers today spoke about will also be on that link as well. So you can go there and sign up, and I'll pass it over to Anjali.
Great, thank you, Rachel. That is an awesome concrete way to take action. So as I mentioned, I am a campaigner with Sierra Club BC, and we are, for those of you on the call who are from the West Coast, and even if you're not, we are doing an action that's targeted at the Premier, John Horgan. So we're doing a form letter that you can also find at this link. It's very easy. It's better if you put it into your own words, but the letter to Horgan essentially asks that he take the just recovery principles as pillars of BC's recovery plan from COVID-19. And as we speak, the BC government is drawing up their plans for recovery. So it's absolutely critical. And we have a small and important window to really make our voices heard, that these are the principles upon which we want to build our economy back and build our society back better. So you can find the form letter there, and please, if you're able, to put it in your own words and personalize it a bit, because we found that personalized letters are significantly more powerful in reaching government. So thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Logan.
Great. And so all of this Just Recovery work has been a coalition effort. So hundreds of organizations have come together to shape the vision for a Just Recovery. And you can become a part of the network by signing up at this link, and then you can add your own local organization to be one of the signatories or signers of the Just Recovery, and you can take action and see some of the art and other resources that are connected to the Just Recovery network and the Just Recovery work. So you will also see on that sign up page a spot for you to check there that you'd like to be involved.
Yes, and while you're signing up to take action, we're going to play you yet another song. This is a great song by one of my favorite artists, Kari McClellan. It's called Liberty Song.
It's time we stand up and tell the truth to the hungry, downtrodden, and forgotten youth. We waited long enough. The cheat is up, it's heating up. Our time ain't long. It's time to do more than just sing songs. I want love, sacrifice, dedication, and relief for refugees without a nation. It wasn't that long ago when my great-grand was choked by yokes and Anna lost for hope. But with the help of the underground, she made it safe and sound. Went from lost to found. Hear the sound of the people like thunder speaking. Free men are coming at liberty's call. Rise in the power of the tyrant is breaking. Millions are rising. Millions are rising. Millions are rising from slavery's thrall.
Great. So one of the last things that we are going to do together is take some collective action together on social media. Minister Wilkinson was not able to join us today, and so we want to make sure that he and other cabinet ministers really do hear from us. So we're going to send them messages directly, and we'd love your help in doing that. So grab your sign if you have it. If you don't, that's totally fine. You can still just craft a message. Snap a photo of yourself, like a selfie that you can see here on the screen where Cherry has taken a photo of herself and then posted it on Twitter. And you can use the Twitter handles and hashtags that are referenced here on the slide for some of those key ministers like Minister Guilbeault, McKenna, Minister Baines, and Wilkinson. So if you can take a moment and do that right now, then that will send a flood of messages to these cabinet ministers who were not here and didn't attend the rally, but they will then receive those messages and see the groundswell of support for a Just Recovery. If you don't have social media, then you can send your photo to photos@leadnow.ca and we'll tweet it for you, and we'll make sure to tag these cabinet ministers.
All right, so we have played some incredible music for you on this call. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to the artists that we featured, just so that you have a chance to look them up and support their work. If you haven't heard of them before, I hope you get a chance to explore their music going forward. These are some of my favorite artists: Tanya Ganaba, Desiree Dawson, Kari Wendell McClellan, and Kinney Starr. They are artists who have strong themes of social justice and liberation in their music, and their music has carried me through many years of being in this movement, and I hope it inspires you similarly.
Thanks, Anjali. I am definitely, as we speak, I was just putting down some of those artists so I would make sure not to lose them. So we are nearing the end now, and I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for joining us. None of us alone could have the kind of impact that we're talking about. It takes all of us coming together and taking action to make it happen. And so I want to just extend a very warm thank you for the thousands who have been on Zoom and also watching on Facebook and have been participating as a part of this digital rally.
Absolutely. And we also want to say a huge thank you to our guest speakers, to our members of parliament, to all the staff working behind the scenes, and our volunteer team sorting through all the questions that came in, and staffing the support line as well. And of course, to each and every one of you for taking your time to be here today, to engage critically. That's the most important thing we can do right now, is to build our knowledge, teach each other, activate each other, and work together to bring about the society that we want. It's only going to happen if we work together. So thank you for coming. It was a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today. You can use the chat. Feel free to use the chat to say goodbye. And if you haven't yet, make sure you go to bit.ly/JRAction to take action so that we can take our learnings from this call and move them forward into building. And we can and we will win a just recovery together. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to play one last song, a beautiful song by Kinney Starr, so that those of you who haven't signed up to take action yet can do so, and we can say our goodbyes to each other. So thank you so much.
Feed the farm.